welcome. I'm in Mammoth Lakes, California today, so we're doing our live stream from a remote location. So if there is any connectivity issues or anything like that, I apologize for that in advance, and hopefully everything goes smoothly and we're able to get through it without a hitch. But today, just to kind of give you an idea of how it's going to go in terms of the sequencing of the stream, we're going to be going over some of the common misconceptions, the things that were frequently asked and talked about in our latest video, which is about what causes tone suck and kind of talking about the primary reasons that this happens. And so we'll get into that a little bit throughout today so you kind of get a sense of exactly what some of those common things were, and we'll kind of go over them. And then we also have a giveaway that we're going to be doing throughout the course of the live stream. So about every 8 minutes or so, we'll do a live stream. We have lots of great stuff today, and we were able to partner with a couple of different great companies, Diodario, Planet Waves, and True Tone for these giveaway items. So just to give you a run through some of the things we're going to be giving away today, we have 3 packs of NYXL's 10s that we're going to be giving away. We have a couple of these to give away today. We also have the string winders, which are great. We actually use those a lot, even in our own studios and at home. We have the True Tone milliamp reader, which is a really handy tool. It's also a cable tester, so it kind of doubles up as that. And then lastly, we have a capo from Planet Waves. And so lots of different options today, lots of opportunities to win. Again, these will all be shipped directly to you, either from us or the company themselves will drop ship it directly to your house. So if you win one of the giveaways today, make sure that you email Mejia, who's going to be kind of administrating the chat. His email address he'll put up there. It's mejia@vertexeffects.com, and he'll let you know that you've won, and we'll identify the winner of each of these. And I'm actually going to be asking questions that kind of checks for understanding throughout about some of the stuff that we've been talking about in our videos and also the video from last week. So you'll get a chance to have multiple opportunities to win. So I'm going to start the clock now for our first giveaway. And in 8 minutes, we will do our first giveaway question. If you answer the question correctly, you'll have an opportunity to win one of these items. So let's get started. So again, going back to the video for this week, which were what causes tone suck, and really looking at the 5 common issues that actually do cause tone suck. There's a lot of things that we commonly saw asked about this, and I think that the biggest misnomer about tone suck is that it's always just one thing, and rarely is it ever just one thing. It's usually this culmination of multiple things that sort of result in the end being something that's a little lackluster comparatively to just the guitar plugged directly into the amplifier, which to me is always the reference that I go for when I'm thinking about how do I want my rig to sound, even if I'm running through 10 or 15 pedals with dissimilar input and output impedances. Maybe some of them are buffered, maybe some of them are true bypass. The reference that I'm always going for is that I want to be sounding as though I have no pedals on and I'm plugging directly into the amplifier if everything is in bypass. So these are some tricks to kind of get you to where you want to be. And so the first thing that we talked about as a big culprit of tone suck was using passive volume pedals, but in particular using the tuner output as causing a parallel load. And this is a real issue that I think a lot of people don't understand. And one of the common questions that we saw asked about this is they said, well, or viewers would ask or commenters would ask, well, what if I have a buffer in the beginning of my signal path, and then I go into a passive volume pedal that has a tuner out? Does that absolve this problem? Does that absolve me from having this problem? And the answer to that is still likely no, because there's probably other pedals that are coming after it that are being turned on. Unless the buffer is actually inside of the volume pedal and is split off from the input, then it's still going to have that same issue with the parallel load. And especially passively, if you're just running the volume pedal up front or something like that and running a tuner off of it, it's certainly going to low down the signal quite a bit. So I don't recommend that you do that. And the easy solution, I mean, and this is sort of being a little bit self-aggrandizing maybe, but a real good solution for this is using the Vertex boost. And the reason why is that the Vertex boost will turn any passive volume pedal into an active volume pedal. And a lot of guys really love the tapers of like these old Ernie balls, and I actually love them too, and I use them. The problem is they have an appreciable tone suck, and we showed that actually in the video that we did of what happens when you run a volume pedal in series versus running it into some sort of buffer, and we use the Vertex Boost in this case, but you don't necessarily have to use the Vertex Boost. You could use another active volume pedal. So Ernie Ball makes an active version of that. The buffer in it is not as good as what's in the Vertex Boost, in my opinion, but it's another way to go, which will be better than using no buffer at all. And then there's companies that will modify the actual existing volume pedals for you with a buffer. Even Creation Audio Lab, which is the company that we partnered with for our buffer DIY kits, they make a version that can be installed into pretty much any conceivable passive volume pedal. And then Lely makes my favorite active volume pedal in the whole wide world. They do a great job, very robust, very well built. I think that that's definitely one to check out if you just want to kind of, you don't want to have to worry about buying a separate boost to put your volume pedal like using our Vertex Boost. You just want something that kind of just resolves the whole situation in one unit. I think the Lely one is a really good one to consider if that's what you're looking at. Let's take a few questions and then we'll get to one of the other causes of tone suck. So he has kind of been going through and he's been throwing up some of the common questions. Looks like we have people from all over the place. I want to also to give a big shout out to Devin over at Diodario, who's making a lot of these Diodario giveaway things happen. So big shout out to him. So thanks, Devin, for being here. He's just one of the coolest dudes in town, and a great guy working with a great company. So shout out to him. Let's see. Mahia's got one for me, and he also Mahia threw the link for the video that we're talking about today. So if you want to check that out, please do that. So let's see. So one of the questions here was music. Music one, maybe this is handles music. I have a TC Mini Flashback 2. It has an option for true bypass or buffered bypass. The input impedance is 1 meg and the output impedance is 100 ohms. Since those are specs you suggest, which is preferable? So I'm not sure, or is it preferable to use it in true bypass or buffered bypass? Well, if you're using it first, which you're probably not because it's a delay, or you're using it last, which you probably are because it's a delay or somewhere toward the end, it would be a great output buffer consideration if you didn't want to have to buy a separate input-output buffer or a dual buffer where the input and output are in one unit, like in the Mesa Boogie Highwire. So this would be a great candidate for a last pedal in the chain before it goes back to your amp, and it would do a good job at being able to drive that line effectively back to the amplifier with as minimal loss as possible. You would still want an input buffer first so that you could make sure that you're controlling that pickup loading of the guitar, and you're also giving as low of an output impedance going into any of the subsequent pedals. And that's just sort of ensuring that you have that hardware firewall of the input and the output of the rig, so it's isolating the guitar from the pedal board and the pedal board from the amp. So that's what I would recommend. And that was from Andrew Luddy Music. So glad we could help with that. Hope that's helpful. Here's one from Cesar Hernandez. He says, do you need buffers in and out from a pedal board to and from an amplifier? Yeah, you want to have, again, guitar, buffer, pedals, buffer, amplifier. So that's definitely what you want to do in pretty much any condition, because usually your cable length is not changing too much when you're talking about using pedals. You still have probably at least a 10-foot going into the pedals, and you probably have 10 or 20 foot going back to the amplifier. That's probably the appreciable cable capacitance that's in the whole system. Of course, the cable connections in between add up. But even on small rigs, you still have that input cable, you still have that output cable. That's not changing typically from rig to rig. Let's see, this is from Mitch. He says, does a buffer change the output impedance of the pedal before it or the input of the pedal after it? Well, it doesn't change what the pedal impedance after or before it is. It's just going to produce a signal going into the pedal that's lower impedance. So, for example, let's say I have pedal 1 that I've turned on, and that has a 100 ohm output impedance. And pedal 2 that comes after it, let's say, has a 500K input impedance. the pedal that's on first is going to be driving 100 ohms into the 500K input of the next pedal. It's not going to change what's there, but that's presuming that it's on. If they're all true bypass, then whatever the last pedal is that's on, or whatever the buffer output impedance is what's going to be driving through everything, presuming that they're in bypass and they're all true bypass. If you have any buffered pedals in there, then that's the point with which the output buffer, or the output impedance of the input buffer, will be disrupted and then will be changed to whatever that buffered pedal is in terms of the output impedance that's following it. So I hope that that makes sense. Let me know if that doesn't work, but we are at 0 seconds, which means that it is time for our first giveaway question. And of course, if you have additional questions, you can continue to put them in the chat and we will get to those as we can. But I want to get to our very first question. So the way that the sequence of this is going to work is I'm going to dictate or recite a question that we've pre-prepared. You're going to answer that question in the chat. If you answer this question correctly, and you're the first person to do so, you will get to win one of these items. And I think the first one that we're going to do is the Diodario 3-pack of 10s. This is going to be mailed directly to you. So you're going to win a 10-pack or a 3-pack of 10 gauge strings NYXLs. So the first person to answer this question gets it shipped directly to them. So please do answer it correctly if you can, as fast as you can. The first person to get it right who comes up on our feed will be the first person to win, and we will let you know who that is. So the first question is, what type of buffers are used in Boss pedals? Now, you could have two different answers here because there's typically two different types. So if you have any one of those two types of buffers listed, or if you want extra credit, you could list them both. But the first person to answer it correctly first will get to win these 3 packs of NYXLs, my favorite strings. I use them on almost every guitar that I have, every guitar in our showroom. Go ahead and answer that, and Mahia will let me know the first person to answer that correctly. All right, and the first person to answer correctly is Lorenzo. Lorenzo Bellini is our first person to answer this correctly. Congratulations to Lorenzo. Lorenzo, if you could email Mason Mejia at vertexfx.com. He'll throw that email in the chat. Email him with your full name, your address, and your email where you want us to send the tracking information, and your phone number if you're not from the United States, because we're going to need that for the customs forms. Let us know that. We will get those out to you pronto. So go ahead and do that, and I will restart the clock in another 8 minutes. We will do another giveaway, so stay tuned for that. I want to get into the second cause that we talked about in our video last week. Again, this is the causes of tone suck, the 5 causes of tone suck. We're going to look at one of the second things that we talked about and some of the questions that came up around it. So the second cause is too many true bypass pedals. So we got a couple of pedals that are true bypass, or at least with the flashback, it can be changed to be buffered bypass. So the real issue is, when you have too many true bypass pedals, it's essentially the same as just elongating the guitar cable. So if you have a 10-foot guitar cable coming out of your guitar into the pedal board, and you got 10 true bypass pedals that are all off, it's essentially like just elongating the length of the cable. And not only is it all the interconnection cables, but it's also any of the circuitry in between the input jack, the foot switch, and the output jack. So you get all that capacitance also in between. And so that can be just as detrimental as having too many buffers, in a sense, in that it's going to certainly roll off some of your high end the same way that a long cable would. It may not have the same dynamics the same way that your guitar would sound if it was just plugged into the amplifier directly. So this can be just as much of a problem as having too many buffers. And one of the things I think a lot of people don't understand, however, though, is if they have true bypass pedals and they often have one of them on all the time, a true bypass pedal that's turned on is a buffer. So if I have a pedal that's on, that's a full tone, full drive, let's say, and it's on all the time, that will always be a buffer in my system, because any true bypass pedal turned on is a buffer, true bypass or not. So that output impedance is going to be driving. Now on a full tone, full drive, which is based on a tube screamer, it doesn't have a great output impedance. It's going to be a really fantastic line driver. It's going to be mediocre at best. but it'll still be a buffer in that context in any sense. So in these cases, it can be a buffer if something's on. The quality of it may not be so good, but all things being equal, you really want to go with the solution to too many true bypass pedals is having strategic buffers in the right place. So ideally, that would be first and last in the system. So a dual buffer, and I showed a few of them here. The Bonafide buffer from TC is a really good budget one, as is the True Tone Pure Tone, and also the Mesa Boogie High Wire, which has an input and an output buffer built into it, plus a tuner out and a boost. So those are a couple different versions that you could use depending on your budget, your price point, and we should have all these linked as well in almost every single one of our videos. It'll even be linked in this video once the live stream is completed. So if you ever want to look it up or have that as a reference point, you can always look back at what that is. But let's go and take some other questions that have come in. This one is from Luke Swan. So in your opinion, on unpotted pickups for professional, or what is your opinion of unpotted pickups for professional live players? I'm getting crazy squeal at loud volumes, wondering what I should do. It's really tough with unpotted pickups. I mean, technically, this is the more vintage way, to have newer pickups that reference a vintage style pickup. But they can be pretty unusable. And one video that we did where you can actually see this is we did a video with Nick Mayberry, who's a fantastic, fantastic player from Australia. And he was doing some dynamic distortion videos. And if you know anything about the dynamic distortion, it's probably one of our highest gain pedals we've ever made. And he had an original, I think it was a 69 Strat, all original, even the pickups. And of course, that meant that they were unpotted. And so we were getting crazy squealing, and he was going through a Marshall. And it made it difficult. It made it really difficult to be able to. I mean, he did a great job anyway, and it ended up having plenty of usable stuff. But it wasn't as easy as just being able to sit down, play the instrument, and not really have to worry about the pickups feeding back or creating the squeal that is, unpleasant not only for you but for anybody who might be, listening to your music as an audience member. So there's a couple workarounds. You can change your pickups. You can pot the pickups, but that's going to make them unoriginal, and that could affect the sound to some degree. Usually there is some differences, and small differences, but there are differences between a potted pickup and an unpotted pickup, even if it's the same exact pickup. My advice is that if it's a vintage instrument, that I wouldn't disrupt that. I would probably just change the pickups and keep those pickups original, so that if you ever went to sell the instrument, you would never have to have a concern of somebody saying, well, I like this guitar, but I can't give you what it's worth because it doesn't have the original pickups. This would be an easy way to preserve them and then make sure that you have something that's workable in the meantime, that you could use, that you think sounds really good, but maybe isn't going to have the same consequences. So I think from a live perspective, probably not usable, probably not a good idea to use. And I would stick with something that's newer, or that is a high quality replica. If I knew more about the instrument that you're using, I could maybe give you specific examples, which you're welcome to put, and I can try to get to that. But that's my advice for that. This one is from Total Evo 7. You said the other day that 500 ohms isn't necessarily terrible output, or isn't a necessarily terrible output impedance, referencing the synesthesia. Would it work going into a one meg input of an amp modeler? Well, it's not that 500 ohms is the worst, So usually, kind of consumer level output impedance for a buffer or most pedals is 1K, and then kind of more the pro level, I would say, is 100 ohms. 500 ohms is somewhere in between the 1K, 1,000 ohms, and 100 ohms. So is it going to be awful? Not awful. Is it going to be as good as 100 ohms? No. But I think that depending on how much capacitance is on the output, what you're running it into, it may not be that problematic. And the best way to test it, sorry, we're getting some lighting differences. The best way to test it is to put your pedal board into a true bypass looper and then compare that with what happens when you just have the guitar cable going directly to the cable that's going to the amplifier versus involving the entire pedal board. And then you can really get a sense as to whether there is any appreciable difference in loss or dynamics. And that won't necessarily help you single out that it's just the buffer. But you could do that test with just a buffer, and I've done that test. And usually, the 500 ohms can be acceptable to a point, depending on the actual buffer that it is. Some of them might be able to do a little bit better with capacitance on the output, some of them less good, just the same way that there's some companies that make a buffer that has 100 ohm output, but they're using a TLO whatever 72 or some version of a TLO chip, and they're running it down that low, but it's really not supposed to be run below 1K, otherwise it's unstable. And so you can see people playing games with this where they're using sort of the wrong chip, and maybe they're running it in the ideal spec, but the way that the infrastructure of the actual circuit is made, it's not designed to go that low. And so maybe they check the box of having a good spec, but the circuit can't actually handle it. And so I would just expect that with GFI, they're really smart engineers and good guys, and they know what they're doing. I would suspect that 500 ohms, they built the infrastructure around that in terms of any sort of buffering on the output impedance to be fairly good. So I would guess that you could probably get away with a 20 or 30 foot cable without much consequence, but you can always test it. I think that's ultimately what you should do if you're considering doing this. But we are already up for another giveaway question. So again, the way this is going to work if you're coming to this new is I'm going to recite the question. You're going to answer this question in the comments section. The first person to answer this question correctly is going to get, in this case, we're going to give away a True Tone milliamp reader. So this is what I use a lot if I just need a fast reference to see how much current something's drawing. And you can also use it as a cable tester, which is kind of a cool like double whammy that it does. We're going to be giving that away. That'll be shipped directly to you. So again, first person to answer this question correctly wins a True Tone milliamp reader shipped directly to your house. So let's go to the question. The question is, what are the two prerequisites for a high quality power supply? I guess there's more than two, but name two prerequisites for what makes a high quality power supply. We've talked about this a lot of times on the channel. What are examples of that? What are two things that that are prerequisite or that would qualify something as being a high quality power supply? Go ahead and put those answers in the chat. First person to answer correctly is going to win that True Tone milliamp reader shipped directly to you from True Tone in Nashville, Tennessee. Who do we got? Mejia says that his name is Pascua, Pascauuu. Congratulations. You can email Mason Mejia at vertexeffects.com. Make sure you give him your full name, email address that you want this mailed to, and we will get that going. Very cool. So I'll give you a couple examples of things that you might have written here. So two examples are you wanted it to be isolated. I think that's an easy, simple one that you probably have heard me say a million times and are sick of me saying. Another one I think is although linear can work in some contexts, I think switch mode is definitely preferable. I think that those would be two pretty easy ones that could be some examples of what might have been put there. There might be other things that would be true, but I think that those are two good ones that you might want to say. I'm going to start the giveaway clock again. In another 8 minutes, we will give away another item. And let's move on to part 3 of the 3 things that we talked about as the biggest culprits for tone suck. Let me put that up here again. Biggest culprits for tone suck right there. So we're going to go back to that, and we're going to talk about some of the things that we think are reasons for it. Reason 3 for tone suck, or cause rather, we talked about is having too many buffered pedals. So kind of on the opposite end of having too many true bypass pedals, having too many buffered pedals can be equally consequential. And we showed a cool video again that we featured in another video a few weeks ago with Brian Wampler sort of going through this Jack Orman white paper blog post where he shows a few true bypass pedals in series and kind of looks at how that's affecting the signal, and then does the same with kind of an ordinary Boss style buffer and puts those 3 in series, or I think 3 or 4 in series, and then shows what that looks like. And the consequence to having the multiple Boss style pedals, which are typically a combination of BJT or JFET, you could see that there was a significant amount more of roll-off. There was a significant amount more of attenuation of the signal. It was actually lower. And so these were some big problems that were really obvious when we were kind of looking at what was going on. I just want to honor our super chat here real quick. Howard Fisher Thank you so much, Howard, for all that you're always super chatting us and always giving us some dose. I appreciate that, Howard. It really means a lot. And do put any questions that you do have, and we would be happy to get to those for you as soon as you're ready. But going back to the buffer thing, is certainly it causes some color if you have an inadequate buffer. And a lot of these boss buffers, I mean, they haven't changed much since the 70s and the 80s when they were first kind of becoming prominent in their pedals. And at the time, they may not have been so bad comparatively to what else was out there. But now that we have so many pedals that have excellent buffers in them, guys like Strymons have really good output buffers, just buffers, period. But it's a really low output impedance. So if you have a big sky at the end of your signal path, or you have a Flint or some sort of reverb, those all have really low output impedances and are pretty decent line drivers. And so I think that just when you're comparing kind of what's out there, I understand that those are two different price points, but I wouldn't rely on the buffers inside of a Boss pedal to be your only line driver, depending upon that as your standalone buffer for a system. So just want to give people a heads up on that, that you really still want to use those types of buffers judiciously on your pedal board. And the idea is that you have as many true bypass pedals as possible, high quality buffer first, high quality buffer last, and again, as much true bypass in between. If you have a few Boss pedals here and there, no big deal, but you want to try to limit them. You really want to try to limit them. And so really the solution to that, for if you have some Boss pedals that you have to have in your system, and I've been encouraged by a few of you to actually do a video tutorial on this, is to check out some of these like buffer or these true bypass conversion kits that fit inside of the battery compartment on your Boss pedals. You can get it with or without a switch. For the Boss stuff, you're not going to need the switch. You can just use it on its own. And it's really, really cool. They're made by my buddy Roy over at Greenhouse, and he makes really good stuff. And this will allow you to be able to convert any any non-true bypass pedal into a true bypass pedal, specifically the Boss stuff. And these are really handy. So I will try to get together a tutorial here where we can show you exactly how to do them. We got a couple of other super chats. We got one from Marco. Thank you, Marco, for the super chat. And thank you to Phase 1. I think that's what that's saying. Phase 1. Thank you, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will make sure that we get to those. But let's take a few more questions here. I know we've had some more coming in. Let's see. All right, here's one. This one is from Peter. If I use the Vertex boost with a volume pedal and I have a switcher and want it after my overdrives, is there a way to avoid using one of the loops? So it depends on the switcher. So some of the switchers have volume inserts, which is where I would put it. Like the Boss ES8 has one of these, for an example. Or on like some things like the RJM, or for like some of the Musicom Lab stuff, depending on what generation it is, they would have sort of like bridge loops so that you could go out to an effects loop if you wanted. So you had to go like out 5 and 6 into 7 through 10. Something like that. If you were going to kind of bridge them together, if you wanted to, use an effects loop, you could insert the effects loop at that point, or you would bridge them together if you just wanted to continue the serial loop. And I would use one of those as the place to insert the Vertex boost and the volume pedal there, so that it was after drives, but maybe before where your time-based effects might be. But if you give me a little bit more information on the switcher that you have, or you just email us at info@therigdr.com. Either me or Jacob or Mejia will get back to you with exactly how to kind of weave that into your existing system and the signal path, so you get it kind of dialed in for what you need. So feel free to email us there, Peter, and we can recommend something explicitly for you. Let's see. This one is from Rick. Opinions on the EHX switcher. Haven't seen you use it in any rig build. I haven't, but I actually talked about it in a recent video that we shot but haven't edited, where we were going through kind of a switcher buyer's guide, and we were kind of going with low, middle, and high price points, and looking at kind of what was the best fit, and depending on your budget and what your features are. And I have to say, for the features, it's a really great price point. I think it's like $400 or less than that, $350. I don't even know how they make it that cheap. Like the parts on that have to be a few $100s, just in the switches and digital display and the boosts and all the jacks and all that stuff in the assembly. So I think it's a great deal. The specs on it aren't fantastic in terms of the buffer, but I think they're okay. And for a $350 switcher, you could get another higher quality input buffer and put that into it, or get a higher quality output buffer and put it after it, and you could build that out at a later time. But I think for what it does, it's a pretty easy to use switcher. I've since been able to kind of go through them, and I think for the money, they're pretty great. They're pretty great for what they do. I don't know how reliable they'll be in the long term. Some of the electroharmonic stuff is not always as robust as some of the other kind of more boutique versions out there, but I think for the money, it's pretty unbeatable. I can't vouch for, again, the longevity of it, but I can vouch for the feature set relative to the cost. And you're getting a lot for the money. I think it's got 2 stereo loops in it. So you can run it stereo. It's got stereo output boosts as well, so you can boost your outputs on either channel, the left or the right. So that's pretty cool for what it's offering for $350. I don't think that you're going to go wrong with that. Let's see if we can just squeeze in one more question before we go to our next giveaway. Lorenzo says, have you had any experience tone sucking from the Line 6 HX effects? I built one rig, which we have still on the YouTube channel, that's kind of like a John Mayer, Stevie Ray Vaughan inspired rig. And I did have to do some additional buffering, but I also had a passive switcher in one of the loops. So I didn't investigate how much of it was being caused from the HX or how much was having a passive loop switcher in there, but I did have to buffer the input and output separately. And I did have to buffer in the send and return loop as well. But again, some of that could have been a consequence from having a passive loop switcher. And that one I used the Morningstar switcher. And then I was using the HX effects as the controller. So again, I think the easiest way is to put it in a true bypass looper, listen to it in and out, so you can really get a sense when you're doing a hard mechanical bypass of the whole thing and you're just getting your guitar going into amp, and then bringing it back in and bypass and seeing if it is doing anything to the tone. And then you can sort of build the buffering then around that to kind of address exactly what you're hearing. So we are now ready for our next giveaway. And on this giveaway, I'm going to do, let's do a string winder. This is the Pro Winder. And I think we haven't done this one yet, I don't think. So we're going to do the string winder. This is the Pro Winder from Diodario. Great piece of hardware. Again, use these to string up everything in our showroom, so we'll be giving that guy away. Again, the way that this is going to work is that I'm going to put the question up on the screen. You are going to respond to this question with the correct answer. The first person to answer it correctly is going to get a free string winder. We're going to ship that directly to you, no matter where you are in the world. First person to answer it correctly gets it. So the question is, what does EMF stand for? Now, there's other industries where this might mean something different, but for the purposes of the field of pedal boards and in electronics, what does EMF stand for? This is something we talk about a lot when we're talking about linear power supplies and this problem that they have, this thing that they omit, that sometimes when you start getting your audio cables, you start getting your pedals in this path, it can create a real problem in terms of noise in the system. This is something we talked about a lot. It looks like Mitch Pell was able to get this one correctly. So Mitch, congratulations. We're talking about electromagnetic fields in terms of EMF, and this is something that we experience a lot when people are using linear power supplies underneath things like pedal trains or other sorts of pedal board surfaces where you mount the power supply underneath and then you have your pedals on top of that, and the electromagnetic field from the toroidal transformer or the R core or C core or whatever, the very few of them are actually real toroids, that they get some leakage of the electromagnetic field, gets into the pedals, and then you can have this hum that no matter what you do, you just can't seem to get rid of it. And it's not related to what the pedals are producing. It's that you have this electromagnetic field and it's getting into the pedals. And the more you draw against the total amount of current in these supplies, the worse it gets. I've seen some pretty bad examples of it. And this is why if you ever see us use a linear power supply, we usually put it all in a corner. So it kind of keeps it away from anything. But a cool way to actually identify the strength and the intensity and the space that it's occupying is I take an old single coil pickup and I hook that up to just a normal guitar cable jack, and you can actually just put it, plug it into your amplifier, and you can just move it around the power supply, and you can kind of see kind of how far away you need to move things, because it'll pick up that magnetic field very easily. So it's kind of a really primitive way to figure that out that doesn't require any instrumentation or anything like that really anybody can do from home. So just a cool fun fact on that. Let's go to the fourth cause of tone suck. And again, if you're coming to this late, we're talking about the most common causes of tone suck. So just so you know what we're talking about. So one of the other big things that we talked about was high capacitance cables. And although I would say now the cat's pretty much out of the bag on this, like you don't really see a lot of companies making really high capacitance cables. Oh, and I need to start our giveaway clock again. You don't see a lot of cable companies doing this. Most of them are hip to the idea that they need to try to make them as low capacitance as possible, flexible, even amongst the more budget brands. But every once in a while, you'll see some companies that'll release some really high capacitance ones, and all the interconnections have super high capacitance. There should also be something that I didn't talk about that should be named, is that the connectors in themselves have a capacitance. And I actually did like a little diagram probably 5 or 6 years ago where I measured all the capacitances of all of the different plugs, so you could see what a Switchcraft capacitance had versus a Neutrik versus some of like the off brands. At that time, a lot of people were buying these inexpensive quarter-inch jacks from Orange County Speaker Repair. I measured all those, Horizon, Rapco, all those. And it was really interesting to see that usually the more robust plugs tended to have higher capacitance. And so they were really designed to be used on your instrument cables where there maybe was only, two connection points on the actual cable, on the guitar side and then on the input side. And but using those a lot of times in a series of effects chains, it actually added up to almost more capacitance in some cases than what the cable length would have in itself. So like Neutrik had pretty high capacitance, but really you're only usually using Neutriks in a couple of different places, usually just the guitar side again and then maybe the amp side. Using them in all the interconnectors, though, they had more capacitance than a couple feet of ordinary cable. So they weren't really that advantageous to use in those positions. And some of the kind of smaller, less robust connectors were better to use in those positions. Even the Switchcraft ones were fairly high comparatively to like the Horizon, the Rapco, the Hycon, which were around at that time. Square plugs is very low, which is what we use now. But it was just an interesting experiment that not only is it the cable that matters, it's also the connectors, especially when you have a ton of them in series on a pedal board where you might have 20 to 30 connectors in addition to, maybe 30 feet worth of actual patch cables that are going on there. So just a consideration. But I think that the thing here is that it's pretty easy now to get high quality patch cables, and I think Mogami is by far the cheapest, easiest to assemble, under 50 cents a foot. If you're willing to go DIY, there's no excuse to not be able to get high quality cables for not a lot of money, because Mogami is just so great. The 2314 I think is it's like under 50 cents a foot. It's very reliable, it's easy to work on, very flexible, it's really perfectly designed for the purposes of a pedal board. So we say the solution here in the video is just using higher quality cables. Now there is an argument to be made on the input cable as being higher capacitance. And we see that some guys like to use coily cables, and even the cable that won in our cable shootout for the input cable. So these are just testing the guitar cables that plug directly into the input of the pedal board. So just guitar into input of the pedal board. We're not talking about the ones on the pedal board or the ones after the pedal board. This is the one that presumably doesn't go through any signal conditioning whatsoever. It's being driven by passive guitar pickups. The cable that was chosen most was a fairly high capacitance cable, which was a Belden 8412, which is a twisted pair shielded cable. And that had around 90 picofarads per foot, which is pretty high. I'd say an ordinary Mogami is somewhere in the 30s. And so people like that, and I believe it to be because it shifts kind of the resonant frequency of the pickups down to a place where people just prefer how they interact. But you also have to remember that capacitance isn't capacitance isn't capacitance. And if you listen to a ceramic cap of the same value of a mica or some other composition, you're going to even hear differences within that. So it's not always that high capacitance means that it's going to sound worse. There can be some variability within the same exact readings just depending on how the actual cable is made and designed. But for whatever reason, in most of those cable shootouts that we did two different ones with input cables. And the higher capacitance cables were almost always chosen. And I don't know if that's just because we actually like a little bit of roll off naturally going into the amplifier, or maybe there's just some dynamic feel thing that happens and that works better, whether it's distortion or whether it's clean. We tried these cables through all different sorts of amps, clean amps, dirty amps. We use Les Pauls, we use Strats, and across all of those different variables, still the higher capacitance ones seem to be chosen more. Again, that's only on the input cable. That was nowhere else. That was just the guitar into the input of the pedal board, the first cable there that has no signal conditioning. So let's go to some more questions. Um, and let's see where we are. Devin, our hero from Diodario. Oh, yeah. We're happy to get you on these streams, and we're so glad that we can be giving away this stuff. Big shout out to Devin and the Diodario family. Okay, Yosef, where should I put my treble booster, and where should it be placed on a pedal board? Is it okay to run a fuzz after it? Well, I would say that the order there should be early. If it's a germanium treble booster, a traditional vintage treble booster, should be as close to the guitar as possible. It doesn't really matter the relationship to the fuzz unless you plan to use them both on at the same time. Then you probably are going to want to experiment and see if one works better being fed by the other. Now, these are typically vintage germanium transistors or silicon transistors in these. And some of them, one of them may like to be driven by the other better in terms of the output impedance matching up better with it. So I would say definitely as close to the guitar as possible. Experiment with them in position if you plan to use them both together. If you don't plan to use them both together and you're just going to use one or the other, then that order is irrelevant, doesn't matter anymore. Let's see, what else do we got? Okay, this one's from Marco Hernandez. Any special considerations when using a dual buffer for a bass pedal board? Okay, so a couple considerations. One, are you using active pickups? If you have an active bass, then the need for the input buffer is no longer there. Now, if you're switching between active or passive basses, then I would just say keep the input buffer there. It's not going to hurt the active pickups, the active bass pickups, but it's going to help you when you go to passive. The other thing that I would say is if you're using wireless, you won't need an input buffer, but you may want to have one there in the event that you have to go corded and you no longer have the wireless unit becoming this low impedance or converting your signal to low impedance. Another thing is on the output section, so that was just talking about the input buffer. On the output buffer side at the end, considerations are you going balanced out? Are you using something like a Noble or a micro tubes from Dark Glass, or are you using a Tech 21 that has a balanced DI out? If that's the case, and those have low output impedances, I mean, hopefully if it's balanced, it's at least under 500 ohms, but preferably as close to zero as possible, that you wouldn't need an output buffer there if you were going balanced. But if you're going unbalanced, typically those outputs are much higher impedance, more like 1K is kind of the standard that I've seen. And there you would want to use an output buffer if that were the case. So, and I would say the other consideration is really just making sure that you're matching your input buffer. We're going backwards now, the input buffer. Matching that input buffer impedance as closely to the amplifiers that you're using if you are actually using an amplifier. So if your amplifier's got a 1 meg input, you should try to get a 1 meg input impedance buffer. If your amp's 2 meg, try to get a 2 meg input impedance buffer. If you have a couple of different amps that you use, you could actually build our DIY kit and put the R1 value on a switch. And then you could have a switch position for 3 different resistor choices, because on the DIY buffer that we do, whatever is in that R1 position sets the input impedance. So if it's a 1 meg resistor, it's a 1 meg input impedance. If it's a 2.2 meg resistor, it's a 2.2 meg input impedance. So you have some control there, and that's a cool thing. And if you don't know how to do that, just email info@therigdr.com, and I'll send you a really simple diagram that you can just adapt to the existing buffer diagrams that we have already listed on the website. All right, we're out of time for that, so we're going to do another giveaway. This is question number 4. Again, I'm going to dictate the question. The first person to answer this question correctly is going to win. Let's see what we want to give away for this one. Let's give away a capo, a great capo Light, adjustable tension, a bestseller over at Diodario. We're going to be giving away this guy, get it shipped right to you no matter where you are. First person to answer the question correctly is going to win this free capo. Again, I'm going to say the question, read it on the screen. First person to answer it in the comment section correctly, or in the chat, I should say correctly, is going to win. So the question is, who is credited, I should say, as the pioneer for true bypass switching in guitar pedals? Who is thought of as sort of the first guy to really popularize this? We've talked about him a few times in a few of the recent videos. Who is that guy? First person to answer correctly will win that beautiful capo from Planet Waves, Diodario, our good friends there. Who was the first guy to really pioneer true bypass in guitar pedals? I should say who's credited. Maybe he wasn't the first, but he's certainly credited as the first. And I think self-proclaimed as the first as well. All right, Lorenzo Bellomo. Congratulations. Make sure that you send an email to mahia@vertexeffects.com. He will get you all set up. With that, it should be Mike Fuller from Full Tone was kind of the first guy on the scene to really be pushing true bypass, and I think really made the industry pivot to that standard. And he did a great job at sort of preaching the values of it. I think, you know, as we talked about in one of our last videos, there was sort of a backlash to that after a certain number of years when people realized that it wasn't the panacea that we thought it was. But nevertheless, I think it's important that we recognize the value of true bypass. He's certainly one of the people or one of the individuals that popularized it, even if he wasn't the first person to come up with that particular type of wiring. In fact, I'm sure that he wasn't the first, but he was certainly the one to popularize it in our industry. So Mike Fuller gets the credit for that. And we're going to do one more giveaway. And our last giveaway is going to be in 8 more minutes. So make sure you stay with us so that you can be here for the final giveaway. But we're going to talk about the last cause of tone suck that we covered in the course of our video. And again, our video for last week, or I guess it was still technically this week, were the 5 causes of tone suck and how not to be caught off guard by them. So one of those things was about I'm already giving away the solution. Let's go back to the problem first. So vintage bypass in some of these older pedals, like old wahs, old fuzz faces, old MXR pedals, a lot of vintage style devices. I keep showing you the solution. A lot of those vintage style pedals used a single pole double throw foot switch. There wasn't any way to really create a true bypass to that with that type of switch. So what they ended up doing in order to create this bypass is some values inside the actual circuit itself, some capacitor, some resistor, some passive components were left in all the time, whether the pedal was on or off, and this would create an appreciable tone suck. And this was, kind of just a consequence of the way that things were done at that time. I don't really think people were anticipating that they would be using multiple effects in series when they were designing these, and that they'd have these giant pedal boards. I think that they presumed that if they bought a Phase 90, they were probably just going to plug in the Phase 90, play their part, and then that would be the recording session. Or if they were using it live, there would be, not enough pedals on there where it would really be an appreciable difference. However, in the way that we use them now, it really is not workable and can really create quite a bit of tone loss comparatively to the higher quality true bypass stuff. And we want to have our vintage pedals, but we want to be able to use them on the rig. And so what do we do about that? The solution was to modify these to a more modern true bypass, either with a double pull, double throw switch or a triple pull, double throw foot switch, depending on what you want to do and whether you need an LED and things like that. Typically the WAs don't have LEDs, so those can use a double pull, double throw for the true bypass. But if you want to have the LED, you're going to need the triple pull, double throw. I showed a nice alpha 3-pull, double throw foot switch, which I think are the best ones out there. And I gave links in the video to 2 different individuals that have really great sites that offer a lot of DIY tutorials that will show you how to convert those vintage style pedals into a modern true bypass so that you get all the benefits of no tone suck. It just bypasses it completely, so you just get input jack to switch to output jack, and then it's not involving any of the other circuitry in the actual pedal itself, so you're not going to get any tone suck as a result of that. But that is another really big thing that we talked about in the course of the video this last week. Let's go to some other questions that had come through. Let's see. So this one is from Bryden Jacobson. When using the dry out of a nanopog for my, or would using the dry out of my nanopog for my tuner cause any tone suck? Well, if it's true bypass, and I think it is, then I believe it would, because I don't think that the dry output is buffered. And an easy way to tell is just unplug the power from the nanopog, and if you engage it and it if you unplug it and it doesn't work, then it may be that it is buffered. If you unplug it and it still passes signal, then you'll know that it's true bypass and you're still getting that parallel load. So I imagine that it is true bypass, and I imagine that it'll still work even with it unplugged, but that's an easy way that you could test it to see. All right. Let's see. This is from Tyler Jackson. He says, I'm interested in running a 66 Bassman and a Mesa single rectifier simultaneously. Can I just use a dual output like a SHO, or do I need something like a radial Bones ABY? Well, you could use something like an SHO, which just has a parallel out, so you have 2 outputs to split output. The only problem that you might run into are, one, that there's a polarity difference between the 2 amplifiers. Some people call this phase, although it's really polarity. Or you might run into a situation where you'll have some sort of noise or a ground loop because the amplifiers will either be spread too far apart, or they'll be on different AC lines, different wall outlets for power. And so the benefit of the radial boxes or some of these ABYs that have galvanic isolation is it'll, one, give you a polarity or a phase switch so that you can make sure that both the amps are in the proper polarity. And secondly, it will eliminate any issues with noise due to a ground loop because one of them will have a transformer and it will provide that galvanic isolation. If you're going to use them all the time, you could also check out the Lely P-Split. That doesn't have a foot switch for the ABY. It would just be always wide. So both of them would be on the same time, but it has a great transformer in it, and it has the polarity control, and it has a ground lift. So there's all kinds of cool things that can do. So that would be the conditions I think that would be the reason why to use something like a radial over that. Next question is, do you have an issue with tone suck with David Ryan Harris's Pedalboard in regard to using the Digitech Expression Factory? I'm curious where you placed such digital expression pedal. I have a similar setup. So in that rig, if you watch the kind of the build, we actually put it in a true bypass looper, and we had a Keeley true bypass looper for that board that actually Gabriel Bergman, if you're watching Gabe Bergman, shout out to Gabriel Bergman, provided so that I didn't have to make one because we had talked about how much of a tone sucker it was. So it actually is in a true bypass loop. So he has to hit that Keeley true bypass looper in order to have the expression factory in the signal path because it was a tone sucker. So that's actually wired into a true bypass loop. Marvin Music says, "What's your favorite JB poem?" I think it's the one with the line which is, "If I were a tiger, would you put me in a cage?" I'm not sure the title of that name of the song name, but I think that would be my favorite. Check out Marvin's podcast, and this will make more sense to you. They have an excellent podcast available on all the major streaming apps, so definitely check that out. This is from Cristiano. Uh, what of my pedal board has only buffers? I mean, maybe it's what if my pedal board has only buffers? Well, you could use the route of modifying them with the greenhouse mod kit. But I guess my question would be like, do you really love all these pedals? Like maybe you really do love all these pedals that have buffers in them, and that's part of the sound that you have. I would say that if the signal purity is a problem for you, then maybe the route is going either with a switcher or a true bypass looper, because that would probably be cheaper than modifying every single one of them. And it provides the true bypass for you, consolidates it in a singular place, in a consolidated place, and then you can bring them in and out as you need, and you don't have to have all the buffers running. Because remember that if you have most of these BJT and JFET buffers, there's generally not just one of them. There's often multiples. And we used the example of the Boss BD2 in one of our last live streams. And that has one JFET input and two BJT output buffers. So it's three buffers in just one pedal. So if you're thinking about multiple pedals in series, you could have 20 buffers between a group of pedals on a pedal board if they're of that type of variety of pedals. So there's just something to consider. Um, let's see. Jesse Daly, the Universal Audio Effects, no MIDI, mistake. I guess time will tell. I mean, they have a pretty sophisticated marketing machine, so I think that their advantage is in that how ubiquitous and pervasive they are. I think that the question that I've seen come up a few times that I think is the more valid question is what differentiates these from something like Strymon, where it does have MIDI or it has a favorite switch like a El Capistan or a Flint or something of that nature. And I don't know that the Universal Audio stuff is made in the United States. I'm pretty sure the interfaces I know are made in overseas in China. I don't know if their pedals are. I would presume that they are probably made overseas in China. I think most of their stuff is. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Great products can be made there. An iPhone is made in China, and we all love those phones, and for their functions. It's not a bad thing. But the cost of labor in China is significantly less. And so when I see a Strymon device that's sort of equally equipped, that's $300, and then I see the UAD that's 400 or 450, I kind of wonder how much of that is sort of borrowing on their namesake, and not necessarily giving back that value to the customer. And I think that that's the more legitimate criticism. Now, maybe they are made in the United States, and all what I just said is completely irrelevant on that ground alone. But that would be the consideration that I was just thinking of. Now, I've heard that they sound great. I haven't tried any yet, but I'm certainly willing to be honest and give it a fair shake when one is in my presence. But that I think is one thing that is a more legitimate concern. I mean, if it can really nail a memory man and it can really nail a tape echo, I think that those are all really touchstone devices that everybody loves, and I hope that they do. Because I think that's a good thing for everybody if they're really nailing it. But the price point relative to where it's made, because presumably with a lot of these, they have kind of the same bones in terms of the way that they're designed, and then they're programming the algorithms in accordance to what device it is. And so in some of those old devices like that, you could take a Line 6 DL4 and put it in the MM4 body, or you could just take the chip out and move it over, because that was really the only thing that was telling it what it was doing. All the other hardware and it was the same. And I don't know that that's how it is with UA, but ordinarily that's what we see in a lot of these types of devices, where it's kind of the brain is programmed to be what it is. the hardware is identical that sort of insulates whatever the software side of it is that's kind of telling it, to make that it's a delay and that it's to make these 3 different delay sounds when the switches are in these positions and the potentiometers are moved in these positions. So, I guess more will be known. I haven't seen any information that confirms or denies that it was made overseas versus here, but I know that Strymon is all made in the USA, and so that would just be a thing that I would think about. And hopefully we figure out that information soon. And again, I don't think it's a problem to be made in China. I think you can get great stuff made there. Again, case in point is iPhones are great. Apple computers are great. Those are all made in China. It can be done well. I just wonder from a consumer standpoint that is that something that should that savings be given to the consumer, or I don't know how much their costs are too. So these are all considerations, but I have to presume that if Strymon can make a really great tape echo for $300, that we should be able to make one in China for less than that at market. So we got one more super chat in here, and then it's time for our final and last giveaway. I just wanted to recognize Nathan for a super chat. He asked, can the Pro Tone buffer from True Tone suffice as a good end of chain buffer if I have a Vertex boost in front? Yes, I think that would be an excellent combination. I have no qualms at all about using those two in combination. I think it's a good, excellent way to combine them. I love it all the way. And again, thank you, Nathan, for that super chat. Super appreciate it. All right, last question, and then we are going to wrap up. Just want to give a few quick announcements. If you are part of our subscriber base that is doing paid memberships, we do a private live stream that follows this immediately after. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can head over to therigdr.com, and we have a couple of different options. We are still also offering our Patreon memberships. We do have some limits on how many people can be part of that, but I think at the lower level, the $5 level, there's plenty of openings there, so you're welcome to go and join there as well. That gives you the same privileges whether you go to therigdr.com or whether you go to Patreon. You get the same rights, same privileges, and the cost should be the same on both ends. Equally, we are running a sale this weekend, so I just wanted to let people know about, and this is on therigdr.com. So it's $25 off all orders over $100. So if you need cables, if you need instrument cables, patch cables for your pedal boards, if you need any of the high quality Velcro that we use on all of the pedal boards, the Power Grip Velcro, if you need zip ties, tie down mounts, any of the pedal board accessories that we use for all of our rigs, those are all for sale there. So you can head over there to therigdr.com, $25 off all orders over $100. That ends on April 3rd at 3 p.m. So head over there, check it out if you haven't already. See if there's anything that you need. You can get that savings. So definitely go check that out. And let's get to the last question, and then we'll start our private streams for our membership. One other thing I should add about the membership. Sorry. If you can't afford any of those levels of membership, just send us an email, info@vertexeffects.com or info@therigdr.com. Either one of those will end up in the same place. And if you can't afford a membership, just send us an email. We grant free memberships to anybody who asks for them. If you can't afford at the $5 level, we will give you that, no questions asked. We don't want there to be any barriers between you and getting the tone that you hear in your head. So please do email us. Don't be bashful. We just trust that once things turn around for you financially and you can afford the $5 level, you'll become a contributing member at that point. But until you do, you can hang out at the free membership as long as you want. There's no questions asked. We don't badger you. We don't ask you anything. We just ask you for your email, so we're able to send you all the notifications that all of the members get. So definitely hit us with an email if you want one of those free accounts. So last question for today. Question number 5. Again, I'm going to say the question. First person to answer it correctly is going to win this. This is going to be another 3-pack of Diodario NYXL 10s. So first person to answer it correctly is going to win those. I'm going to say it. You're going to write it in the chat. Let's see who gets it. So the question is, name 3 high-quality buffers that I recommend. And I actually showed 3 of them in one of the earlier parts of this video. So if you watched that part, you would already know the answer to this potentially. 3 high-quality buffers that I recommend. What are these brands and the models of these 3? So you can either say the 3 models. You could say the 3 brands. I think that we'll know what you're talking about either way. First person to get that wins. All right, this is Vagabond Audio. Got it. Name 3 high quality buffers that we recommend. Congrats to Vagabond Audio. We will get that mailed out to you by next week. Make sure that you email Mejia at vertexfx.com. He's going to put his information in there. Make sure you give him your name, your address, all that stuff. Make sure you email him there so that he knows where you are and how to get this stuff to you. And some of these will be drop shipped from the actual manufacturers themselves. So Mejia and I will connect on which one of those manufacturers are doing that. Others of them, we will forward them to you. We'll receive them and then we'll pack them up, ship them to you. Those might take a few extra days just because we have to go through, box them up or put them in flat rate envelopes and then get them to where they're going. So just so you know on that. So thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for all those super chats. We really, really appreciate that. And if you're part of the private stream, Mejia is going to send you that link right now. So you'll be able to log right in and we'll get started right after this. So thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.